Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tyler Rohde. I sit down with comics and talk to them about comedy and various other things. All I ask of you is to like and subscribe, and let's get on with the show. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm right now sitting down with Todd Link. How are you doing, Todd?
I am doing great, Tyler. Thanks so much for having me on today. The pleasure is all mine.
So, let's, as always, start out with something simple.
Sure. Simple's good, especially in my case.
Oh, yeah. Where did you grow up or born or whatever that was?
I was raised in Southern California, the Long Beach, Lakewood area, about 20 miles southwest of Los Angeles. I was raised out there in the perfect weather. So a little sticky out here, but we're adjusting.
Yeah. So what's your definition of perfect weather?
Well, perfect weather to me, being from California, I'm kind of, I'm cold-blooded, as they say. I like it about 78 to 83. That's about perfect for me. Maybe in 80s with no humidity, then we're okay. As long as I have a pool, though. If I got a pool somewhere, any weather's perfect.
Whenever you have a pool, that's just perfect. Heck, it could be 200 degrees. As long as you have a pool, you're boiling, but you're perfect.
That's right. The pool is the great equalizer and the world's cheapest babysitter if you have kids. Throw them in the pool. You're good to go.
Yeah, I was about to say, because my idea of a perfect weather is 50.
Okay. A little different than mine.
Well, considering 80 versus 50, it's like 1 degree or something.
Celsius. Yeah, however they figure that. But I started doing comedy when I was in college. I'd always wanted to be, I wanted to play in the NBA. Being 6'4", I wanted to play in the NBA, but when I graduated high school, I was 6'4" and 130 pounds. So that wasn't really going to probably happen at that time. So I said, a good second choice would be stand-up comedy. So all through junior high and high school, I would do talent shows and things like that. And kind of got my feet wet as far as getting in front of people and being comfortable and telling jokes. I would, take other people's jokes back then. In junior high school, I'd watch the Unknown Comic on the Gong Show and these other guys. And so I would do it then. And then when I got to college at San Diego State, go Aztecs, I started going to the Comedy Store. There was a Comedy Store. People know the Comedy Store in Hollywood, the big famous one. But when I was in college, and I believe it's still there was a Comedy Store in La Jolla, about 20 miles north of San Diego State, where I was going to college. And back then they had open mics on Monday and Tuesday. So I would go, every week when I could. I would go up twice a week, do about 5 to 7 minutes, and I did that for the 3 years that I was there. And so by the time that I got finished with college, I was 23 and 24, and so by then I'd already had about from being able to get up so much back then, I already had probably 15-20 minutes of material, so I could get work almost right out of college. So it worked out pretty well as far as doing that.
Just had a thought. How the heck does someone who wants to play in the NBA go from that to comedy? Because let's be honest here, someone who's a little bit bigger doesn't go for comedy. They go for, in my case, sitting down with random comics every week and doing this thing.
Sure. Well, I was growing up, all of my friends were pretty funny. They're not get up on stage for 45 minutes and do a set act funny, but they would always come up with quick one-liners and stuff. So growing up, I was always around funny guys.
Yeah.
So because of that, I got a quick wit and learned to be fairly funny. And I wouldn't say I was the class clown. I was the guy who would say something quick and clever in class once in a while, and the teacher would like that because I wasn't acting up. I was just being witty. And so I never really got into trouble. I wasn't the class clown, but I was interactive, shall we say, with the teacher sometimes. And most of them like that. I got in trouble very, very rarely growing up, which is a shock looking at me now.
Yeah. So right now you're emceeing here, correct?
I am. This week I'm here with the great Mr. Showtime, David Scott, and the hilarious Chad Thornsberry.
Yep. So how long have you been coming to the Comedy Cabana?
I've been coming here, it's longer than you think. I've been coming here about 8 years. And normally when I'm here, I'm obviously with Jimmy J.J. Walker. Yeah. I'll feature in front of him, do 25 or 30 minutes. But I just love coming here. Jeff and Christine are great, so anytime they can slide me in. This particular week, I've had some family in town, so it worked out well that they could get me in here, at least in the MC spot, and see my family and have them come to a show. So it's worked out well so far. Of course, we have 3 shows left, so we'll see what happens tonight and tomorrow, knock on wood.
That sound.
Yeah, someone wants the show to start right now, apparently. They can't wait. We'll edit that out later.
Yeah. So, of course, you're with Showtime, and of course, you're with a bunch of different comedians a lot.
Sure.
How does it work with other funny guys?
Well, in this business, if you're going to be a famous comedian, which is really the 0.001% of us, they're going to go on tour, they're going to play theaters and whatever, and they're going to bring their own openers whenever they go. I've got a friend of mine, Brian Kellen, hilarious guy. He's been opening for George Lopez for about the past 15 years.
Yeah.
So they're locked in together and will be until George decides to hang it up. But the level below that are the club comedians and the cruise comedians, which I fall into, obviously. And I've been doing it, over 20 years now. So generally speaking, if you're working clubs and that kind of thing out 20 years, you're going to run into most of the guys that are working at some point. You'll either work with them, they'll be there a week before you, a week after you, so you may see them in passing at the condo when you're coming in and out.
Yeah.
You're doing a guest set somewhere to get into a club, they're passing through town, you'll see them. So as far as I'd say there's probably maybe 200 to 300 full-time working club comedians. And as long as I've been doing, you're going to cross paths with them at some point.
Yeah.
And generally speaking, 99.9% of them are great, just out there doing their thing. You meet a couple that are kind of douchebags, but that's few and far between, thankfully. And I fit into the douchebag category myself. I'm including myself in that, yes.
So, of course, whenever you go to a club to do a show, now, from my understanding, you mostly feature, correct?
Yeah, and I'll headline someplace. Like Jimmy, sometimes, he doesn't like doing late Friday shows. So, if I'm in a club with him, I'll headline a late Friday show.
Yeah.
And then sometimes, I'll headline other clubs on my own. Jimmy normally works a club every 2 years, and I'll try to work a club every year. So I'm there the year he isn't there normally. So sometimes I'll headline that time. And it all depends how it fits in. Sometimes they have a guy that can't make it for a night or so you'll fill in headline in for him. But yeah, I usually feature for him and headline other places.
Yeah. So whenever you feature, how is it, how do you, let's say the MC, not ruins the crowd, but just loses them. They get mad at him, he does something stupid, various stuff like that. And how do you bring that back to almost set up the stage and make sure the crowd is ready for the headline? Or even just for you yourself? Yeah,
thankfully that hasn't happened too often. But there's been certain occasions where, just for some reason, it's a tough crowd. They're just not, they're drunk or just not ready to focus or whatever. But mainly I just, if the MC's having a tough time, I'll pretend like he did great. I'll come up and say, hey, give it up for the hilarious whatever, and they'll clap for him, and then to them maybe he did do great. Oh yeah, maybe he is great. So you just let them know, and then I just give it up for your waitresses and maybe some other birthdays or something. They kind of get them not focusing on the previous act, but just like this is the show, that part of it's done, and we're just going to go from now on, and I just kind of start fresh. But it doesn't happen too often, thankfully.
So whenever you're a comic, you have to travel a lot, correct?
Oh, yeah. If you're going to be a working comedian, you have to be on the road quite a bit, depending on, how much money you want to make and what level you want to attain. I'm single and don't have any kids, so the money I make I get to keep, so I don't have to work quite as often as some other guys. But, I work, 30, 40 weeks a year.
Yeah. What do you prefer? Do you prefer, a plane? Do you prefer a car?
My rule is if I can get there from wherever I am, if I can get there in a day, I'll drive.
Yeah.
Because when I get somewhere, if you're working a week-long club like this, I just like having my car when I'm somewhere and be able to get around, not have to rely on people like you or the great staff at clubs to come get me and bring me to the show. And I don't want to impose on those people. They got their own lives and they're doing their own thing. So if I can get there in a day, I'll drive. If not, I'll fly. Jimmy and I, we're both living in Vegas now. I was living near Nashville for 7 years, so traveling to certain parts of the country was a lot easier from there. And so with now, we'll fly, we'll rent a car if we have to. But normally, like I said, the rule of thumb is if I can get there in a day, I'll go ahead and drive.
So whenever you drive, do you prefer to listen to the radio? Do you turn like a podcast or
A lot of both. I've got the satellite radio, so I'll listen to some comedy channels. I'm a big sports fan, so I'll listen to ESPN or Fox Sports or something like that. And I'm obviously a big Elton John fan, so even though I'm a little bit young to be in his wheelhouse as far as his fans, they're normally in their 60s and 70s at this point. But he's got a very vast catalog of 25 to 30 albums, so I can pop a couple of his in there, and I'll listen to a CD, then I'll put on the satellite radio, then I'll listen to some talk radio, possibly on something else, maybe some politics, since that's a fairly hot topic these days. But
Yeah.
I just like to mix it up, not have it get too monotonous and boring out there. So I do a little bit of everything out there as I travel.
So me and you a couple of days ago were talking about music.
We were.
And what do you, besides Elton John, what do you prefer? What era? What type? What?
Well, yeah, growing up in the 80s, you think I'd be a big 80s guy, but I was not a huge 80s guy. There's a couple of bands in the 80s I like. I like the Cult, and let us see some other ones. But there were a lot of bands in the 80s that were like a lot of one-hit wonders. They'd come in, Rock Me Amadeus with Falco. He was a one-hit wonder. And some of these people. So there weren't a lot of sustained bands from the 80s that are still going now. I'm mainly a 1970s guy, even though I grew up in the 80s. When you go back to the 70s, and this is just my opinion, obviously, you've got, to me, the greatest collection of music and musicians and bands of any era, if you ask me. You've got Led Zeppelin in their prime. You've got Elton in their prime. Aerosmith started to come out in their prime. You've got bands like The Who in their prime. You've got Skinner. You've got all these bands who were, just great and in their prime in that era. And then even you go to the end of the 70s, and you got, bands like Duran Duran that had come along. The Go-Go's started right about that time. And to me, that's the greatest era of music. The disco era, 77, 78, okay. You can kind of do what you want with that. Some people like it, some people don't. That's, I guess, the one black eye on the 70s for some people. But as far as music-wise and bands and talent in their prime, to me, Heart, Queen, even you throw them in there, that's the greatest era of music in my opinion.
Yeah. So, what do you think about modern music?
Well, as I've noticed, as music has gone on, the performers have gotten better looking and the music has gotten worse. Whereas you go back to the 70s, the performers, not so great looking, but the music was excellent. I think nowadays, and obviously this is my opinion, it's more of a packaging deal. We'll say, well, this person's nice looking. What we can do is we can put them on stage. We can amplify their voice, do some mechanical stuff with it. We'll put a drum machine behind them. We'll put a couple of synthesizers back there. We'll put about 5 dancers back there, just dancing around, flying around the whole show. And that's what we'll call a concert now. Like my niece went and saw Beyonce. She's 17. Loves Beyonce, the greatest thing ever. But I watched the concert, and I'm like, there's not one musician on stage. There's nobody played anything. She's just dancing around with a head mic on. There's 9 dancers behind her. There's a big light show going on, and that's what they call music these days. And obviously, I maybe sound like the old guy, get off my lawn guy here, but I think that I'm fairly progressive, at least in my musical taste and assessment. And that it's just, there's some good bands these days, but generally speaking, that's kind of how music is done these days, with just a packaging deal, someone good looking. If we get them good looking, they can sing a little bit, we'll take it from there.
Yeah. But like one big thing that points that out is I don't remember. I don't know or remember or whatever a single modern singer's name right now as I'm trying to think. But yet I could name, like Aerosmith, Led Zeppelin, heck, even like Ugly Kid Joe.
Oh, sure.
A bunch of
Counting
others.
Crows, some excellent bands back in the 90s.
I can remember their names, but yet I can't remember a single.
Yeah, because those guys will be here and gone in 2 or 3 years, so it's not that big of a deal. Obviously, Beyonce's had a pretty long shelf life at this point, and Pink has done well, and Gwen Stefani's still out there touring, and she's obviously writes a lot of her own stuff and does a great job. I actually am a fan of hers. I think most of the real music still, quote real music in quotation marks, is from the country artists. They still play their own, they write their own stuff, they play their own instruments, so 90% of them. And if you want quote real music, I mean, that's I think one of the reasons country music has become so popular in the last few years. Because
they're the last bastion of guitar and drums.
Yeah, absolutely. They'll have a full band. They go on tour with a full band. And that's one thing I love about Elton. I've seen Elton in Vegas probably 30 times, and he's got his 6-piece band. And I'll tell you, they still jam. They're getting up there, but they still do a great job.
Yeah, and I was watching a live version of Aerosmith that they did like about a year or two ago. I think like 2016 or something. But like they still sound great.
Oh yeah.
And like
if they can sound great, anybody can, because the drugs they've done, they should have been dead 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Like even Europe, they in Sweden they did a live. They sang live the Final Countdown in Sweden Rock, and he lost his not lost his voice. His voice, got a little bit worse or a little bit
changed.
Different. Yeah, different. That's the word. Over the years. So instead of just trying to sing like he used to, he decided to take his current voice and add it to the Final Countdown instead of trying to.
Yeah.
And that's just what makes a good musician. Someone who knows how to adapt despite their current conditions.
And I mean, that's in a lot of things, too. You look at sports, it's like Vince Carter. He just got signed by the Hawks. He's going into, I think, his 21st year in the NBA. When he first came in, he was dunking over his head, jumping from the top of the key, but he can't do that anymore. So he's learned how to be a better shooter, and he's adapted his game, and he's hung around this long and has a great career. So it's music, and just like you said, it's adapting to what is changing and filling it now to what you can do as opposed to what you used to do. Everybody changes and adapts.
Yep.
At least the good ones do.
Yeah, and that's so whenever you like we said, travel around, fly, stuff like that, and get to a place, I'm sure you often go to the condo with the same comic. Can't think of the word right now. Not live, not
cohabitate.
Yeah, that's a good
one. Reside.
And how is that to stay with another comic in a condo?
As far as the living conditions for the week when you're somebody you don't know, or it's in the old days there would be 3 or 4 of you at a condo.
Yeah,
they would have the MC, the feature, and the headliner, and possibly an act from the last week who had a couple of days off, or somebody that was coming through town. So in the old days it was a little bit different, because that place you never knew what was going to happen when you showed up. But these days it's a little more organized. It's usually you and somebody else, maybe 3 on a rare occasion, and it's a lot better now. I mean, nowadays the places you stay are much nicer than the condos I stayed in back when I was first starting. Back when I was first starting, they didn't care as long as there was 4 walls and some semblance of a working bathroom. They didn't care. In fact, I'll tell a story that Chad told me this week. We were talking about condos yesterday, and he was saying there was a condo. I forget what city it was. I want to say maybe Milwaukee. I'm not positive. I think it was Milwaukee. He had gotten there, and he had a pair of socks. He had a pair of sports team socks, Kansas City Royals socks. Okay, and they were his favorite socks. He'd wear them while he was driving because they were thick and they were cool on his feet and didn't have to wear shoes. So when he got to the condo, he didn't want to lose them, so he took off his socks and he put them behind the door of the bedroom so he wouldn't forget. He put them right there as soon as he got there that day. So the week goes by, he does his shows, and he leaves, and he forgets to take the socks with him. And so he goes, I came back to the club to work it a year later. I walk into the bedroom, I open the door, the socks are still laying there behind the door a year later after he'd been there. So that's how much care they used to take at the condos and cared about the comedians back in the day. Not one person had thought to clean out the socks in a year that the condo was there. So yeah, that just gives you an idea of how important we were to the clubs.
So I'm sure you see a bunch of new comics, like not every day, but
Oh yeah.
Often. Like sometimes here you'll have guest spots of comics trying to become comics and stuff like that.
Sure.
From what you've seen, is it easier, harder, or is it just plain different to become a comic today than it was
20 years ago,
yesterday?
Yeah, I think it's both harder and different. When I first started, I started in the early 90s, and there had been a comedy boom in the mid-'80s where, clubs were just opening up right and left. Every big city had 2 or 3 clubs. You could work. You literally could make, as an MC, just working places $500, $600, $700 a week as an opener, which is good money back then. 20-some years, decent money now. It was really good back then. But then I got in the early 90s just as the boom was starting to go down. There were still a few clubs most places, but it was maybe 2/3 of what it was in the boom. So I was able to still get started and get on stage pretty regularly when I first started out. Doing it now, it's like there's just so many fewer clubs, and I don't want to say there's more comedians now, but there's probably the same amount, just less work. So you've got to really hone your skills, and really get after it. But when I'm with Jimmy, we usually get there a couple days early when we're doing a city, and we'll come watch the open mics all the time.
Yeah.
We like watching new guys come up, but I think a lot of them these days are a little dirty. They're trying to shock the crowd more than make them laugh.
Yeah.
But those guys don't normally last too long. But we've noticed some very, very funny guys, and we'll go into a town if we don't have an MC for the week. We'll just go to the open mic and see a guy that we like, and this guy's really good. Let's put him on the show. And so Jimmy's been very, very, very good about helping young comics get along.
Yeah.
Get their start.
So of course nowadays comics, pretty much everyone that wants to do business has to use social media.
Oh, sure.
Now I personally, and this is funny considering I'm 16, at my age I should love, but I absolutely detest social media. What's your views on?
Well, the social media has been probably the greatest thing to happen the last few years, and probably the worst thing to happen as well. It's like, on Twitter, and every idiot has a voice. As I like to say, it gives every idiot a chance to be heard, which isn't always a good thing. Yeah. But these days, with most people interactive in social media, I know guys that get booked just because they've got X amount of followers on Twitter or Instagram, and it's they'll go in, they've got 10 minutes of material, they'll headline the guy because he has 100,000 followers, and he stinks, and they never come back. So it's a good way to get your stuff out there as far as YouTube and clips like that, but it's a double-edged sword in that, like I said, you get some acts that aren't ready yet that are thrown into the lion's den, as they say, and it also gives any idiot who doesn't like you or whatever a chance to get on there and tell everybody that you suck. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
But it can be useful, generally speaking.
Yeah.
For the most part.
So that's strange. That should be better. It's quieted. Or at least I think quieted.
Yeah, no, there's no rumblings in the kitchen anymore. Apparently the rock concert has started and they've leveled off in there.
So, and of course, nowadays, a bunch of, well, I almost want to say kids these days, but then again, I'm part of the kids.
Yes, you're a kid. That is true.
But the kids these days, they are on social media all the time, which a lot of the people who defend social media say that they're able to socialize more. That's what it's called, social media. But then the people, including me, that don't like social media, say they're not interacting with human beings.
No, they're not. It's social. Kids these days are a lot smarter, I believe, than when I was growing up, and I'm not that old. I'm in my 40s. So I think they're smarter. My 8-year-old niece could type when she was 8 years old on a keyboard. I had to wait till junior high till I do that. So the kids are smarter, and their brains are functioning a lot faster speed, but they're more socially inept.
Yeah.
They don't go outside and play with kids. When I was a kid, you'd have to drag us in off the streets to get us come in. It'd be 8 o'clock, and they'd make us come in. No, can't we stay out? So we're out playing. These days, they sit there and play video games. Not all kids, but generally speaking, they'll play video games, and that's their social circle, talking to people on the internet that they've never met. They'll play Fortnite with somebody 9 states away, and he's their buddy, and they've never met him and never talked to him. So it's they're more socially inept, which obviously is not a good thing, but they are smarter. So we got to try to find a way in the middle where they still develop their brains and they're smart, but are also socially interactive and can cope in social situations. I think that's part of the problem. That's I don't know if it's a problem, but let's just take the last election, for instance. These kids that are just voted for the first time have been told their whole lives that they're great, and they got a participation trophy. If they finished in ninth place, if they were the worst kid on the worst team, they still got a trophy. So they thought that I'm entitled. I'm the greatest kid ever. Then when they didn't get their way one time, they just snapped and couldn't handle it. So
one of the greatest teachers is failure.
Oh, absolutely. No question about that.
That's what most people have taken away from kids my age and even the young, like even 5-year-olds. Like, I even say that, they always say, oh, but their kids will change or they'll change or whatever. But I always say you should allow failure the moment they can talk or speak. Because the more they fail, the more they learn, the better they become, the smarter they become.
That's right. Experience is the name we give our mistakes, as we like to say. I mean, when I was a kid playing sports, getting a trophy was a big deal. You had to finish first, or maybe second, you got one. Nowadays, every kid gets one, no matter what they've done. It's like, oh, you got a trophy. Well, what'd you do? I didn't play. I just sat the bench. Oh, well, here's your trophy. It doesn't give any drive for any kids to succeed. You gotta want it, especially in sports. It's going to get weeded out around the late teenage years. So you better get out there and work, because it's not going to be that way once you start being in high school in real competitive situations.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. I'm not a big fan of bringing politics into my things. But you brought up the last election, and I just had to say that was the worst thing in the universe.
As far as the results, or just what happened and what has happened since?
Everything.
Okay, everything about it.
Because you had the fact that because both Hillary and Trump shouldn't even. They always say, but it should have been Hillary. It should have been. No, it shouldn't have been either of those two. Those two should have been shot up to the desert of Alaska where they can meet all the locals. Yeah,
I always said I thought we should just not have a president for 4 years and just all promise to be on our really good behavior for the next 4 years. So it's weird about politics now because it's. I'm not a young kid, but I'm not old. I'm kind of in the middle. It's more divisive than I've ever seen it. People have unfriended or won't talk to members of their own family now because they voted for a certain candidate. It's like the old days. You would say, oh, so-and-so's a jerk. Oh, so-and-so's an idiot. And you would laugh. And you'd see that because they're all crooks and have a beer and everyone's fine.
Yeah.
Nowadays, people just take it personally. It's like, I'm not talking to my friend because he voted for Trump or because he voted for Hillary. It's like, are you that stupid?
Yeah.
There's someone in your family, whoever it is going to be out in 4 years anyway. Okay, whoever is the president doesn't really have that much of an effect on your life, really. They have checks and balances where one guy doesn't get too much power. The fact that you would split over your family, and I know families that have had this happen.
Yeah.
They've been divided over who they voted for the president. I just want to shake him by the collar and go, are you idiots? And just throw them in a room and say, don't come out till you work it out.
Yeah, the biggest people that's going to affect your life isn't the president, the highest person in the universe. It's the local... The people you vote for locally.
Exactly. And your boss at work and your family. Those are the people who are really going to have influence on your life.
Yeah.
So, yes, you need to really kind of get a grasp on that. And I don't talk about politics in my act because if you take one side or the other, you're going to automatically alienate half your crowd. So
if you try to go into the middle, both of the sides are going to say, no, you're the other side.
Yeah.
Because there is such thing as a middle, but neither side wants to say that.
Oh yeah, exactly. And people are so. It's on the news 24/7 now about this kind of thing, and so I figured it's covered enough. I could talk about other stuff. But Jimmy Walker, I will say, is one of the few comics who can brilliantly navigate his way and talk about both sides, and you don't really know what side he's on.
Yeah.
Which is tough to do, but he can do it. He's one of the few guys I've met that can. But it's certainly tough waters to navigate, especially right now. No question about that.
Well, I thank you for sitting down here and talking to me.
Oh, my pleasure, Tyler. I'll be expecting that $100 gift card in the mail any day now from Best Buy for my guest appearance. What is the podcast called? Can we
talk about comedy?
Talk about comedy. All right, sounds great, and a pleasure for me to be here today. And anytime you need me, you let me know. If I'm not in jail, I'll be here.
Thank you. Please remember to like and subscribe, and to talk to you again soon.